When I was about 6 years old, I was playing with these planes around my house. I think I had some kind of action figure or some kind of character inside of it. It might have actually been Army Men, I don't remember. I was flying these planes around and I was doing a dialogue between both characters that I was playing with. And so there came to be this scene that I had made up where they needed to go get water. And then the other guy, in response to the one plane asking him if he wanted to go get water, he said, "I'm parched. Of course I want to go get water." And my mom, she started getting so excited. She went, "Wow, that's such a big word that you just used." I believe my brother said something similar. They both got so excited about it. And I just looked at them kind of confused because it was a word that I heard on television. I heard it in an episode of SpongeBob. They used the word parched, and I could infer the meaning based on the context of the scene. I didn't forget the scene because I thought the scene was a little bit funny, and so that was forever a word that was in my head. I just remembered that it meant you were thirsty, because the context of the scene seemed to suggest that was the case. And so I used it. That's how you learn things. You look at it, you look at other people using it, and then you can kind of infer the context around it that, okay, they used these words in the sentence, therefore there's a limited set of meanings that you could ultimately come to, which means that you have a limited set of words that you could use in that context. And so we can infer that parched means that you're thirsty because, someone asks you if you want something to drink or suggests that you might get something to drink. And of course, that response, with the kind of intonation that SpongeBob was using in the scene, as well as the way he seemed kind of thirsty, we can infer that's what that meant. And so there's multiple, there's multiple meanings that you might be able to derive from it. There's a few different guesses that you could come to, but ultimately, when it comes to learning from context, there's a main one that you can come to if you just look at all of the things surrounding it. And so I don't understand why people have to be so incessant about learning the meaning of every single word in a sentence when they're trying to learn through exposure in another language. Because the way that we learn, as I said from that example from when I was little, is by hearing it. We hear it enough times and we know enough of the words surrounding it that we can infer the meaning of the other words that are in that sentence. If you put on a political debate or something, of course you're not going to be able to understand what it means because you don't understand all of the other words that are being used. You have to understand the basic foundation, yes, but the way that we ultimately climb to that next height is by listening to words that we don't necessarily understand, exposing ourselves to them. People are afraid of failure. They're afraid of doing something that they think that they're going to mess up in, and so when they're trying to learn words, they have this very methodical approach where they have to learn every single thing before they allow themselves to learn through exposure, that they want to learn 100% of the words being used in their favorite anime before they even touch that episode in in raw form instead of with English subtitles. And partly I can understand that when, you only understand about 50 or 40% of a show, you're certainly not going to watch it without the English subs. But if you understand 70 or 80%, that could be a great learning opportunity. You could just put the show on, and yeah, you're not going to understand the whole thing. But the fact that you're putting yourself in that environment where you're constantly being exposed to the language without help, without English subtitles eroding the experience, then you're going to learn it better. You just have to have the foundation first, which is why a lot of people recommend you watch shows for children. Now, children's shows, they don't necessarily exclude more complicated words. They still allow you to learn them through context. But they also don't invite the use of political terminology. You know, there's a very well-defined difference between watching Star Trek or, you know, something that's really complicated in comparison to watching an episode of Caillou, you know. And so it's really important. It's really important if you're going to learn anything to just do it. Now, people have this conception about speaking. They say, oh, you have to speak a language all the time, when that's not necessarily true. You know, when I was learning Russian, I immediately noticed that I was making all of these errors in how I was pronouncing the words, in how I was speaking it, but I didn't know that I was necessarily doing that because I had continually reinforced the usage and the pronunciation of these words by just saying them wrong so many times. People, they don't understand how important it is to have that unconscious recognition of how you say something. And so if your main experience with a language is constantly speaking it in an incorrect way, never pronouncing it correctly, then that's going to reinforce that unconscious understanding of the language, and you're going to constantly be speaking incorrectly. That's not good. And so I think what's all the more important is to study the meanings of said words yourself and to, you know, learn how these sentences are structured, learn how they're used, learn what they mean in context with images and memories you can apply to them and so on. And then constantly exposing yourself to the usage of that language, not necessarily using it yourself. If you understand the meaning intuitively, and then you're constantly having to remember that understanding of that meaning by constantly being exposed to it, by seeing it in context, you're not only going to be using your knowledge there, thereby reinforcing it in your memory, you're also going to have new context being applied to that memory. And so when you think, you know, let's see, what's an example? You know, you're thinking of the meaning of the word "здравствуйте" or something like that, and you've now applied that memory to your favorite character in a TV show saying it. You know, he walks into the room with a suit on, and you know he's got a smile on his face. He's all excited, and you know he's like "здравствуйте, товарищ" or something like that. And then, you know, everyone gets excited. You're now going to remember the meaning of those words in the context of that TV show. You already knew the meaning, sure, but now you're going to remember it even better because you have an image in your head of those words and you have a context that you can identify it with. You remember the emotions of the words, the story behind those words, and you now have that story to reinforce it in your memory. It's incredibly important. And so I think people, they need to stop, they need to stop putting so much emphasis on speaking incorrectly and then just assuming, oh, it'll automatically get better if I have that aha moment. No. Each time that you speak incorrectly and pronounce things wrong, and you continue reinforcing that in your head, you're going to have to consciously change that, and that's exactly the same as learning the language in the first place. So it's like you're learning it incorrectly just to learn it properly later on, which I think is really stupid. Like, if you're going to learn to pronounce it, you're going to have to learn to pronounce it correctly from day one. If you're going to be, you know, trying to pronounce it correctly in the first place, which I think is the goal of most people. And so I think it's much, much more important to focus on understanding, to focus on comprehensible input, making sure you understand what it is that you're listening to, and then eventually build up enough of a foundation in that to start speaking, and to start, when you start speaking, of course, to pronounce it correctly from day one. One of my favorite YouTubers who talks a lot about language is Lula Lampero. He's this Italian guy who speaks like 8 different languages at advanced levels, and then speaks like 10 other ones to varying degrees. But his videos are really interesting because you listen to his Mandarin Chinese, for instance, and all of the tones are incredible. But he talks in one of his videos about how when he was studying Chinese, what he did was that he made sure to get all of the tones correct from the beginning. Is that the reason his English, for instance, is so good that it sounds like he's an American is because he focused on that pronunciation from the beginning. Now, there are certain things that he recommends that I've heard other people be a bit disparaging towards. For instance, he's one of these people who says you should speak from day one. There's a lot of people who disagree with that they tend to say, well, when you're 1 year old, or when you're just a baby coming out of the cradle, you don't necessarily start speaking from day one. You have to listen to it a bunch of times before you can start formulating your own sentences. And based on all of the research that I've done, all the people that I've listened to, as well as my own personal experience, which doesn't mean too much given the fact that I'm not super experienced yet, but based on everything I've seen, it's more important to get a foundation and to understand what it is that you're listening to and reading, and to just do that constantly afterwards, and then start speaking. If you start speaking from day one, your brain is going to start clinging to these beginner mistakes. And it's much easier to not make those beginner mistakes when you know what it is that you're saying. Once you know what it is you're saying, it's much, much easier to start focusing on pronouncing it correctly, because you already know all of the meaning and maybe some of the grammar and so on. And now you can speak correctly because you can focus entirely on pronunciation instead of just focusing on meaning and pronunciation, which muddies the waters a little bit. You're focusing on too much at once. And I mean, for my goal is that I don't really want to speak that much. I just want to be able to understand what it is that I'm viewing. And so, because that is the biggest aspect of my goal, I think it makes much, much more sense to just focus on understanding. And then eventually, as you understand, you can start speaking more effectively. It's kind of like, another linguist who I tend to watch, Steve Kaufman, as he says, language learning, it creeps, it seeps and then it leaps, something to that effect. In the first year, or in the first few months, it seems like it's creeping, you're not doing super great, and then it starts getting a bit better at the 6th or 7th month, and then, after a whole year, it leaps, and you notice all of these ginormous changes. You're making so many improvements. And he's a big proponent of this method of just listening and reading, is that if you listen and read constantly, then eventually speaking is going to be easier. And so that's kind of where I am with that. I don't think most viewers of my channel are going to be particularly interested in this vlog, because I'm just talking about something that probably only I care about. But I need watch time on my channel, because I'm almost at 4,000 hours of watch time to monetize these videos, and I don't know. I wanted to get it off my chest, because I've been thinking a lot about this lately, is that the way I'm going to learn has to be through immersion, because, as someone who's basically an adult at this point, I'm 17 years old. It's considered 18 in the US, but around the world it's usually like 17 or 16. So basically an adult at this point. I'm equipped with the knowledge to analyze what it is that I'm doing, and so I can use shortcuts in my learning. I can take more of a studied approach, but ultimately, the way that people learn, as a child, the way that you learn is by comprehensible input, is by input all the time. And so I know that the only way I'm going to be able to learn is by just putting in as much input as possible, and then eventually through that input I'm going to be able to understand. But you're going to have to get that foundation until you can start watching a show and then understand about 70-80% of it, and then just learn those words through context, as I was saying earlier. It's tough. It's hard out there. It's hard out there for an infinite outlaw, for us lonely stars seeking something a bit better. Hopefully that made sense.